Okay, it looks like I'm streaming live. Okay, well, I'm coming in here for just a very quick, little minute or two. I'm actually getting ready to head out. I'm attending a live event tonight, which is so exciting. I'm really looking forward to it. But what I wanted to say, and the reason that I came on, today is the first day of Women's History Month. And this is a month that all month long, in the month of March, the history of women is celebrated. And it really caused me some thought in the last few days as I've been working with women. I do mostly work with women, and I do work with some men, but I do mostly work with women. And one of the things that I notice is that depending on what era you were born into, so if you were born in the 50s, the 40s or the 50s, the 1940s or the 1950s, then relationships had a different cultural representation. The mom stayed at home, took care of the kids. It was a pretty radical thing for the mom or the wife to work outside the home. As the 60s rolled along and we started to get into more and more freedom for the individual, the voice of the individual, you saw, and the tax laws changed. That was huge for families. The tax laws in the United States changed, and all of a sudden women started to go to work, sometimes part-time. So they're raising kids, they're working part-time. Some moms were able to stay at home, but by the 70s, we hear this term a lot, latchkey kids. There was a whole generation of children who kind of looked after themselves from a certain age forward. Then you saw the kind of the explosion of childcare in the maybe the late 70s into the 80s, into the 90s, which is now a huge business today because it's just kind of taken for granted that children will go to childcare facilities or have a babysitter, someone to watch them if it's not the grandparents, while the mom goes to work. And yet the mom goes to work and then she comes home, and very often relationships get challenged right at that point because the dad is working, the mom is working, but the people inside the relationships grew up inside of a more patriarchal culture. But the world isn't really patriarchal anymore. The shift has occurred, and business world is catching up. It's catching up. It just is, because there's an evolution happening. But as that evolution happens, there's more demands that have been placed on women over the years as this adjustment. There's a bit of an adjustment happening where, there's a cooperative model, a more cooperative model, where in the maybe the 50s, the 40s, the 50s, the 60s, most women stayed at home. They were homemakers. Their whole quest was to have the perfect home, be there for their children, maybe even raise the perfect children. That's certainly the culture that I grew up in. And then I also am part of the cusp into the 60s and the 70s, raised my children in the 80s and the 90s. And I just see, I've been watching culture change. And now I'm watching and I'm studying the reverb of those cultural changes as women start to gain more and more and more prominence in the business world. They start to own, comparable salaries. And so the home structure, the structure of relationships, what you inhabit today does not look like your parents' relationship. And yet, many people, if they haven't worked through those differences and started to claim their own model of collaboration, of collaborative leadership within the home, relationships get hurt. They get hurt. And a lot of times I see women pointing their finger at men saying, he won't do this, he won't do that. And yet the man, in his defense, never saw any of that modeled. And it's a time now for women to educate themselves on relationships and to start realizing that they are the creator of their relationship. And instead of fighting back against a cultural change that hasn't necessarily caught up inside their relationship, they don't have to fight back against it. They can learn some new things. Men can learn some new things, can learn to lead collaboratively. And as I say that, there will always be those things that will be very difficult to let go of. It won't just be a switch flipped. It is a intentional and conscious becoming of awareness. So I am going to spend this month, I'm going to invest in some live streams and give you some thoughts on that, things that I have found to help, in a broad way that would apply to any relationship. And I'm also have an offering that I'll be announcing a little later this week, specifically for women who are resonating with this message, who know that they're in a relationship, or they're in a point of their relationship where they've outgrown the culture that was previously established in the relationship, whether they intentionally established it or they just inherited it and was just running on kind of what they saw modeled in their life. It's going to be about taking ownership as a woman and creating inside of a relationship that you don't have to abandon the relationship, that you can move through and you can move the relationship to new levels of becoming, because relationships become just like people become. Relationships become. Most people don't realize that. Something I had to learn, something that I became very vested in learning. And so I want to share that with a handful of women that will self-select. They'll say, I'm the one. So watch for that, and have a great rest of your night or rest of your day wherever you are.